Okay, let's dig into this. We're talking about a social position, a class almost, that existed for thousands of years across totally different empires, different cultures, and it's this group often seen, way down at the bottom, servants, slaves sometimes, but somehow certain individuals that could rise up and wield, well, massive power. We're talking trusted advisors, generals, even kingmakers.
It's a real historical puzzle, isn't it? How this status, which is defined by, let's face it, a pretty severe physical change, could actually open doors.
Yeah, doors to influence, opportunity, especially within these often really rigid social structures.
Exactly.
So that's our topic for this deep dive. Getting into the history, the different roles, the unexpected influence, really, of eunuchs across time and place. We've got some source material here that gives a pretty fascinating look into their world.
Right. And our goal, our mission here is to figure out how this unique position even started, why it stuck around for so incredibly long, and really focus on how some of these individuals climbed from, the lowest rungs right up to positions of serious authority.
Okay, so let's start with just the sheer scale. The timeline alone is kind of mind-blowing. The sources say eunuchs were around in courts for almost 4,000 years. I mean, just think about that length of time, starting way, way back. 21st century BC, Sumeria, Mesopotamia.
That kind of staying power, it really tells you something about how useful or necessary they were seen to be in certain kinds of power setups. And they appear all over. You see them in the Middle East, Assyrians, early Persians, ancient Egypt, of course, the Chinese empires, Middle Eastern kingdoms later on, caliphates, sultans.
So pretty much everywhere, across a huge swath of history and geography. And like you said, the starting point was usually pretty basic, right? Slaves, servants.
Overwhelmingly, yes.
Yeah.
That was the initial context for many.
So why? That's the big question. Why did this practice even come about, and why did it last so long and spread so far? What was the core reason?
Well, if you look at this sort of the most basic level, castration has been used for millennia for control. Simple as that sometimes.
Control how?
Keeping slaves loyal, maybe stopping them from having families that would distract them or give them other loyalties. Or just brutal punishment, for rivals, or people caught having affairs they shouldn't have been having.
Okay, that makes sense for control or punishment. But in royal courts, in palaces, there seems to be something more specific going on, doesn't there? A more crucial reason.
Yes, absolutely. And this is where it gets tied directly into the dynamics of power right at the very top.
Yeah.
Especially somewhere like China. Rulers, emperors, they lived in constant fear, really.
Fear of what?
Court factions, backstabbing relatives, external rivals, the whole deal. So they needed people they could absolutely trust inside the palace in those very private, vulnerable spaces. And eunuchs fit the bill perfectly because, crucially, they couldn't have children. They couldn't start their own dynasty.
Ah, okay, so no threat to the bloodline, no threat to the succession.
Precisely. They posed no dynastic threat. And, just as importantly, they could guard the ruler's wives, the concubines in the harem, again, without being seen as sexual rivals or, creating complications there.
So it's like built-in security for the dynasty itself, not just general loyalty, but loyalty tied to their physical state.
Exactly right. And here's that paradox again. Castration, obviously, a huge physical loss. It marked them, often meant low status. But for some, depending on the culture, it was actually an unexpected opening.
An opening? How?
It sort of closed the door on the usual path family, having your own heirs, that kind of power. But it could weirdly open other doors to opportunity, a different kind of influence within those palace walls.
And the sources really emphasize how different this looked depending on where you were. The perceptions, the actual roles, they were all over the place.
Oh, completely. It was complicated, often contradictory. It can be despised, but also admired. Trusted completely or deeply suspected, physically, weakened, but gaining real power through the chances their status gave them. The cultural contrast is pretty sharp.
Like, let's take Christian Europe. What was the deal there?
Europe is.
Yeah.
Complex is the word. On one hand, chastity was a big deal religiously, so sometimes eunuchs could be seen positively, maybe as devout, pure even. The source mentions some religious figures actually chose castration, thinking it would help them avoid sin.
But that wasn't the common view.
No, not really, not across society.
Right.
Mostly, they were viewed with suspicion, seen as, lacking something essential, maybe seen as foreign thing and an Eastern import. They hardly ever got high status in Europe. They were mostly slaves, domestic servants.
Okay, generally low status there. What about, say, the Byzantine or Abbasid empires? A bit different.
A bit different, yeah. Sometimes castration was used or chosen specifically to allow men into sensitive jobs. They could even become generals or high-up religious figures like patriarchs. But, and this is key, there was always a ceiling. A hard ceiling. The castration was meant to prevent them from ever getting the top job. They couldn't become the emperor or the caliph themselves. So yes, it opened doors to trusted service, but slammed the ultimate one shut.
Power, but limited power. Which brings us to the big contrast. Imperial China.
Yeah, this is where it's fundamentally different. In China, eunuchs really became an accepted, even integral part of the whole system, socially, politically.
More than just servants.
Oh, way beyond that.
Yeah.
They moved into major administrative roles, political advisors, even military positions sometimes. The source really stresses that for many in China, choosing to become a eunuch was like a career move.
Voluntarily. As a career strategy.
Yes. It offered a path into the court, access to opportunity, maybe political power, and frankly, probably a much better quality of life inside the palace than they get outside.
Wow, that's a totally different way of looking at it. So what was life actually like for them inside, day to day? I imagine it varied a lot.
Oh, hugely. Varied tremendously. If you were in the lower ranks, and this was common everywhere, China included, it was pretty mundane work. Making the emperor's bed, bathing him, cleaning the chambers, running messages back and forth, just constant domestic labor, really. The essential stuff that keeps a huge palace running, but it's unseen work.
Right, the grunt work, but the higher ranks, especially in China.
Totally different world. They weren't just cleaning or carrying messages. They were doing vital administrative tasks. They were relaying important, complex orders from the emperor. They were the ones making sure the emperor's decisions actually happened.
So they were like conduits of authority.
Exactly. And being that direct link to the emperor, that gave them real power, real importance within the court hierarchy.
And being that close, handling all that information, hearing things, that must have given them a massive edge, right, in terms of knowing what was going on.
Oh, absolutely. That information advantage was critical, especially in courts full of secrets and plots. Spending all day in the most private areas, handling sensitive documents, overhearing conversations. They knew things.
And could use that knowledge.
Definitely. The ambitious ones, the clever ones, they learned how to use that information, maybe to help themselves, maybe to help their patrons, or, yeah, sometimes to act as spies for different factions. Information was power.
Okay, let's zero in on where this all reached its absolute peak. Imperial China, you mentioned, specifically the Tang dynasty.
Right. This is where the kingmaker idea isn't just talk, it's actual history.
Yeah.
The Tang court, you have to understand, was just rife with conspiracy. Constant power struggles between different groups, especially rival bits of the imperial family.
A dangerous place to be.
Extremely. So the emperor desperately needed people he could trust, people who weren't potential dynastic rivals themselves. And as we said, eunuchs fit that need perfectly, by definition.
So they went from being just servants to what the source calls a vital hierarchy of trusted men.
That's the shift. And it really climaxed between the 7th and 10th centuries AD, the Tang dynasty. That's when their power was arguably at its greatest. The source gives a couple of really striking examples of just how powerful they became and how involved in intrigue.
Okay, give us the first one. The An Lushan Rebellion, 757 AD.
Right, so An Lushan was this powerful general who rebelled against the Tang. He had this eunuch, Li Fugo, who was supposedly incredibly loyal, very trusted.
Okay.
But then An Lushan started to favor one of his sons over another. The son who got overlooked, well, he went to the trusted eunuch, Li Fugo. Yeah. And Li Fugo, using that trust, that closeness he had, just walked into An Lushan's tent one night and killed him, stabbed him to death.
Wow. The trusted servant assassinates the master.
Exactly. Now, the rebellion itself eventually failed, but that act really cemented this image of the eunuch as someone who could be deeply involved in plots, ruthless, even lethal, right at the heart of power.
Okay, that's pretty dramatic. What about the other one? The Sweet Dew Incident, 835 AD.
The Sweet Dew Incident is maybe even more revealing about just how much raw power the Tang eunuchs actually held by that point. Basically, the emperor got fed up.
Fed up with the eunuch's power.
Yeah, he resented their control. So he conspired with his chancellor, some generals, to set a trap. The plan was to lure the most powerful eunuchs into the open and have them all massacred.
The emperor himself trying to wipe them out.
He was.
Yeah.
He came up with this plan involving supposedly miraculous sweet dew appearing on a pomegranate tree, trying to get them to come look. But it all went wrong.
How?
The plot was discovered too early. Some eunuchs were killed, but many realized what was happening and managed to fight their way back or escape. And then, in a really incredible moment, some eunuchs, loyal to the emperor, basically grabbed him, put him on his litter, and carried him bodily back to the safety of their own fortified section of the palace.
Wait, they saved the emperor who was literally trying to have them all killed.
Unbelievable, isn't it? But the aftermath showed who was really in charge. The plot failed. The emperor was basically their prisoner now. And the eunuchs didn't just, breathe a sigh of relief. They struck back hard.
Darn.
They openly insulted the emperor, abused him verbally, and then they ordered this massive, brutal purge. They had over 1,000 officials, the ones involved in the plot against them, plus their families executed.
1,000 officials executed on the eunuch's orders.
Yes. It was an absolutely chilling demonstration of their dominance. They completely cemented their control over the court after that.
And the source confirms, for the rest of the Tang dynasty, eunuchs pretty much controlled who became emperor. They controlled the succession. They were effectively the rulers.
In many crucial ways, yes.
Yeah.
De facto rulers. Which just makes you ask, how does a group that starts out enslaved or punished end up holding that kind of systemic control over an empire? It really messes with our usual ideas about status and power.
And they stuck around after the Tang, didn't they? Didn't just vanish.
No. They were still there in the Chinese court right up until the very end, the fall of the last dynasty in the early 20th century. But their influence went up and down.
So that Tang period was the absolute peak.
It seems that way. By the later centuries, their power had mostly faded. They were often pushed back into just being servants again, and frequently, they were mistreated, looked down on, abused.
So a long history, a peak of incredible power, and then a sort of slow decline back towards the margins.
That seems to be the broad arc, particularly in China.
So when you think about this whole story, the thousands of years, the different roles, that incredible peak in Tang China, the eventual decline, what does it tell you, the listener, about power? About how trust and loyalty work when the stakes are that high? About desperation, maybe? How people find ways to navigate systems that seem designed to trap them? And how does that unique physical reality intersect with their chances, their possibilities, their limits?
It really makes you think about how power doesn't always reside where you expect it to, doesn't it? It's not always achieved through the normal channels. It shows how specific needs within a power structure, combined with maybe desperation and opportunity, can create these really unexpected paths to influence.
Yeah. So here's a final thought to leave you with, something from the sources to really chew on. Think about how a status, a condition that often began with violence, enslavement, punishment, capture could transform. How it could become, in one of the world's biggest empires, an actual pathway to immense political control, even to deciding who gets to be emperor. What does that bizarre twist tell us about the strange and unpredictable ways power can actually work in human history? Something to consider.